Alright, so let's get this cracking. So right here, we have a bust of Alexander the Macedonian, also known as Alexander the Great. And he was a Macedonian general who conquered the known world during the 4th century BC, within a span of 12 years, from the age of 20 years old to 32, when he suffered his demise. And many people are under the impression that Alexander the Macedonian was a full-blooded Caucasian person, when in fact, he was actually what you would call a mulatto or a mixed-race man. Because as you can see from this bust, you can see the full lips, and they broke the nose down, you know. And we know that it's customary for the nose to be broken off. And a lot of the times, the nose is broken off on purpose to obscure the physical appearance of said person on the bust. But anyway, we're gonna prove that Alexander the Macedonian was a mixed race man. And we're gonna see whether it was from his paternal side or his maternal side. So just to get some background on Alexander, it says, Alexander III of Macedon, commonly known as Alexander the Great, was a king of the ancient Greek kingdom of Macedon. He succeeded his father Philip II to the throne in 336 BC at the age of 20, and spent most of his ruling years conducting a lengthy military campaign throughout Western Asia and Egypt. By the age of 30, he had created one of the largest empires in history, stretching from Greece to northwestern India. He was undefeated in battle and is widely considered to be one of history's greatest and most successful military commanders. So with his father, it says, Philip II of Macedon was the king of the ancient kingdom of Macedonia from 359 BC until his death in 336 BC. He was a member of the Argead dynasty, founders of the ancient kingdom, and the father of Alexander the Great. The Argead dynasty was an ancient Macedonian royal house of Dorian Greek provenance. They were the founders and the ruling dynasty of the Kingdom of Macedon from about 700 to 310 BC. So this was the royal house in which Alexander the Macedonian and his father Philip II was a part of. And the Macedonians were of Edomite origin, a lot of them were. And I'm not gonna go too in depth in this video, but the Edomites, they're chiefly spoken about in the Bible. They were an ancient people group. And you can also find people talking about the Edomites through the means of archaeology. A lot of the ancient nations spoke about the Edomites. I believe the Egyptians spoke about the Edomites, the Phoenicians, and other ancient people groups also documented the Edomites. And when you read about the Edomites in the Bible, they descend from a man called they descend from a man called Esau. And when you see the way in which Esau was described as in the Bible, when you go to Genesis 25, it describes Esau as red and hairy. And then when you go to Genesis 27, I believe it's verse 12, it describes Esau's hair texture likened unto a goat, meaning that stringy hair texture. So that gives us insight into who Esau looked like. And that fits a group of people today known as Caucasian people, Because going back to Genesis 25, it describes Esau as red coming out the womb. And we know that's characteristic of a Caucasian baby coming out the womb red. And taking into account also the hairiness. When you read Genesis 27, Jacob said, my brother Esau is a hairy man, but I am a smooth man. So that's another characteristic of a Caucasian. Obviously not all of them, but a lot of Caucasians tend to be hairy, and especially during medieval Europe. The hairiness was unmatched because they were known as the wild men, or they were known as the woodwolves, because they were living in a very savage and beast-like state where they had hair all over their body. And even taking into account the way in which Esau's hair was described, being like a gold texture, stringy, that fits the characteristics of a Caucasian down to a T. Right, so let's get some insight on the Edomite deity called Kos. It says Kos was the national god of the Edomites. He was the Idumean structural parallel to Yahweh. Okay, so that's all we need. So now let's get a visual representation on how Kos looked. So this is Kos right here. So you see Kos with the hooked nose and the thin lips, and it doesn't take a genius to figure out who possesses these characteristics. And it only makes sense for a nation of people to carve an image of their god in the likeness of their image. Because even when the Caucasian people started to gain dominion over the planet, they started to carve images of Jesus, the saints, and all the biblical patriarchs as Caucasian, as a visual representation of them. So it's much like you see here with the national patron deity of the Edomites, the hooked nose and the thin lips. But anyways, just to give a brief synopsis on how a lot of the Macedonians were of Edomite origin, you had Esau, the progenitor of the Edomites, who had a grandson called Amalek. They became known as the Amalekites. And the Amalekites, they established a kingdom southward of Canaan. Now when the Israelites conquered Canaan and established a monarchy under King Saul at the time went to war against the Amalekites, and the Amalekites had a king called King Agag. And at the time, King Saul was given the decree by the Most High to slay all the Amalekites, but he decided to keep King Agag alive. So then fast forward, during the Persian Empire, also known as the Achaemenid Empire, when you read the book of Esther, you have a person called Haman the Agagite, meaning Haman, a descendant of King Agag of Amalek. Then when you go to the Apocrypha, in the editions of Esther, it not only references to Haman as an Agagite, it also references to Haman as a Macedonian. Then when you read the book of Maccabees, it speaks about Alexander being of Macedonian descent. So that's how you kind of make the connection there. So this gives us the understanding that Alexander the Macedonian was Caucasian through his paternal line, his father being Philip II of Macedon, being of Macedonian origin. So he was Caucasian for his father, and he was melanated for his mother. So let's just get some background on his mother. So it says Olympias was a Greek princess of the Molossians and the eldest daughter of King Neoptolemus I of Epirus, the sister of Alexander I of Epirus, the fourth wife of Philip II, the king of Macedonia, and the mother of Alexander the Great. She was extremely influential in Alexander's life and was recognized as the de facto leader of Macedon during Alexander's conquest. After her son's death, she fought on behalf of Alexander's son, Alexander IV, successfully defeating Adia Eurydice. After she was finally defeated by Cassander, his armies refused to execute her, and he finally had to summon family members of those Olympias had previously killed to end her life. According to the first century AD biographer Plutarch, she was a devout member of the orgiastic snake-worshipping cult of Dionysus, and he suggests that she slept with snakes in her bed. Wait, mad woman. But anyway, so it says that she was a princess of the Molossians. So let's get some insight on the Molossians, it says, the Molossians were a group of ancient Greek tribes which inhabited the region of Epirus in classical antiquity. So with regards to the Molossians, there's not too much on the Molossians with regards to illustrations. But we can logically surmise that the Molossians were a melanated people group in Greece, since we've just got the understanding that Alexander the Macedonian was Caucasian for his father. But we're gonna get more anyway. Just gonna be showing different angles of this bust, which is illustrating Alexander the Macedonian. So this is one angle. It says portrait bust of Alexander the Great. The sculptor has attempted to evoke Alexander's professed religious experience at the temple of Amun in the Siwa oasis. He died before he could fulfill a vow to relate the experience only to his mother. You see, ancient Egyptian, Ptolemaic period, Alexandria. So yeah, man, it's clear as day. You can clearly see, or we can clearly see, that there's at least some form of a Negroid element in Alexander. So now it says here, the Greek biographer Plutarch, circa 45 to 120 AD, discusses the accuracy of his depictions. The outward appearance of Alexander is best represented by statues of him which Lysippus made, and it was by this artist alone that Alexander himself thought it fit that he should be modelled for those peculiarities which many of his successors and friends afterwards tried to imitate, namely the poise of the neck, which was bent slightly to the left, and the melting glance of his eyes. This artist has accurately observed. Apelles, however, in painting him as wielder of the thunderbolt, did not reproduce his complexion, but made it too dark and swarthy, whereas he was of a fair color, as they say, and his fairness passed into ruddiness on his breast particularly, and in his face. Moreover, that a very pleasant odor exhaled from his skin, and that there was a fragrance about his mouth and all his flesh, so that his garments were filled with it. This we have read in the memoirs of Aristophanes. Right, so what Plutarch is noting is a depiction that he saw in Alexander made by an artist, and he's saying, nah, that's not a true representation of Alexander because it's too dark and swarthy. Swarthy being interchangeable with black. He's saying that Alexander is of a lighter complexion, fair and ruddy. Ruddy being in reference to a ruddy cow or a ruddy duck. When you search up a ruddy cow or a ruddy duck, you see them with a brown complexion and a reddish tint. But he's saying that Alexander's fair and ruddy. So meaning that he's of an even lighter complexion than a ruddy duck. So he would have been like a light brown. So just to give an example, for those who watch his basketball, like a Blake Griffin, he would have been that type of complexion. Or for those who watch his football, a Jude Bellingham. And Jude Bellingham's perfect because Jude Bellingham, much like Alexander, has a Caucasian father and a black mother. Okay, so this is just another source that's saying the same thing. It says, this picture known as Alexander Pseudophorus gave rise to a saying that there were two Alexanders, the one of Philip, the invincible, the other of Apelles, the inimitable. It says, Plutarch also observes on this picture that Apelles charged the coloring and made his complexion brown, whereas Alexander was fair and slightly ruddy. You see, so it's basically saying the same thing. And this is from Classical Museum, a journal of philology and of ancient history and literature, volume 4, published in 1847. Now here's another depiction of Alexander the Macedonian. Here you see the full lips and the snub nose. On this one they didn't break off the nose. Now this is clear as day again. You know? It's clear as day again. It says Hellenistic bronze head of Alexander the Great, 2nd to 1st century BC. It says the head of Alexander is depicted as a handsome young man with oblong face, straight nose, large almond-shaped eyes with incised irises and pupils, straight mouth with full lips, heavy jaws, and narrow chin. You see? So yeah, man. This person was not of full Caucasian heritage. He was not full-blooded Caucasian. He was of a mixed race heritage. If he was living today, he will be known as mixed race. And I know I might have a few brothers and a few sisters watching, especially those into the word or in the faith, that might say to themselves, oh, but it doesn't matter, he's an Edomite anyway. His father's Caucasian, he's an Edomite. It doesn't matter what his mother is, the seed line is of the father. It doesn't matter if his mother was a black woman. You are what your father is. So therefore he was an Edomite and we shouldn't be claiming him. And for me, it's not about claiming this individual. For me, I'm just doing this video for the sake of historical accuracy. That's all it is. I just want to set certain things straight. That's it. It's not that serious. I'm not claiming anyone. It's just for the sake of historical accuracy. That's it. Now we have another source called the Town and Country Magazine, or Universal Repository of Knowledge, Instruction and Entertainment, Volume 6, published in 1774. So right here it says, I was too at the siege of Tyre, which after undergoing a most furious bombardment, capitulated on certain conditions, one of which was that the garrison should march out with drums beaten, colours flying, and all military honours. You may perhaps be desirous to have a description of so celebrated a personage of Alexander the Great. I will give you that satisfaction. He was a corpulent man of low stature, had a long nose, was greatly marked with the smallpox, and his complexion was bordered rather upon the swarthy. You see? So when it says his complexion was bordered upon the swarthy, meaning that he had a slightly swarthy complexion, a slightly dark complexion, a slightly black complexion. That's what it's in reference to. So it's going back to what Plutarch said in reference to his fair and ruddy complexion. So now I just wanted to read this real quick. It says, most primary sources written by people who actually knew Alexander or who gathered information from men who served with Alexander are lost, but a few inscriptions and fragments survive. Contemporaries who wrote accounts of his life include Alexander's campaign historian Callisthenes, Alexander's generals Ptolemy and Nearchus, Aristobulus, a junior officer on the campaigns, and one Scritus, Alexander's chief helmsman. Finally, there is the very influential account of Cleopas, who, while not a direct witness of Alexander's expedition, used sources which had just been published. His work was to be the backbone of that of Timagenes, who heavily influenced many historians whose work still survives. None of his works survived, but we do have later works based on these primary sources. So the account from Plutarch, who lived during the 1st century AD, that described Alexander as ruddy and fair, that wasn't an eyewitness account, because he lived 300 to 400 years after Alexander's demise. So he wasn't even there to witness Alexander. So based off what we read from him, it was pretty much information that was either passed down from generation to generation, or it was based off works that he had access to at the time that no longer exist now. So that's just to give you a heads up. Now, I just wanted to touch on this final thing. This is from Sex and Race from J.A. Rogers, published in 1940. It says Alexander the Great, as may be supposed, had Negroes in his armies. One of the most illustrious of the latter was Clytus, his best beloved, whom he made king of Bactria and commander of his cavalry. In fact, Alexander and Clytus nursed at the same breast. Clytus' mother, Dropsica, was Alexander's nurse. Clytus is mentioned by Plutarch and others as Clytus Niger, that is Clytus the Negro, you see? Because back then, nigger was just a Latin term or a Greek term that meant black or dark. People would receive that epithet based off their dark complexion or black complexion. And it was also Clytus the nigger also received that epithet to distinguish him from another Clytus in Alexander's army called Clytus the White. So it was just to make the separation. So you had Clytus the White, he would have been Caucasian, and then you have Clytus nigger, he would have been a black man. And this was one of Alexander's closest friends. And the funny thing is, he ended up killing Clytus as well,